We think we're on. All right, that's good. There's some sports fans in this church, and I know the Macaron boys, definitely some sports fans there. You might remember the 2021 NFL draft. The New York Jets select as the second pick in the NFL draft, Zach Wilson, quarterback out of BYU. He was a Mormon. They should have known better. Jets fans were super excited over this BYU Mormon quarterback until he played, and he was one of the biggest draft busts in Jets history, which actually they've had a lot of them. So I like the Giants, I like the Jets, but maybe the guy's not terrible, but he wasn't good enough. At least it seems that he wasn't good enough to play in the NFL. Zach Wilson had a lot of potential, and it never got realized. Yankees fans, baseball fans might remember, especially people your dad would remember, going back to the 1980s, a guy named Kevin Moss. He wore Kevin Moss's jersey. Kevin Moss, for a half of a season, was like we had Don Mattingly. He was the best first baseman. Kevin Moss comes in out of the minor leagues, has this great second half of the season. We're like, Kevin Moss is the man. He's going to take Mattingly's place. He's going to hit all these homers. He's going to be the next Mark McGwire. And most of you have probably never heard of Kevin Moss for a reason. Or Gary Sanchez, who I was like, this guy's going to be such a great hitter. He was terrible. These guys never lived up to their potential. But we can also think about, now some of us, there's only a few people in this room who, maybe really one or two people in this room, who remember a quarterback, Mr. Metcalf. You might remember a quarterback out of Pitt University in the early 80s, and there was a lot of hype for that quarterback. Do you remember who that was? His name was Marino, Dan Marino. And this guy turned out to be, one of the greatest quarterbacks. Or Peyton Manning, that was another one of your boys. Peyton Manning out of Tennessee University. There's so much hype for this guy. He's going to be fantastic. We can't wait for this guy. I don't remember if he was the number one draft pick. Eli Manning was the number one draft pick. And these guys turned into something great. They had so much potential, and they realized that potential. They actually exceeded that potential. Some of the greatest quarterbacks in the history of the NFL. Now, we see these sports figures. Some of them have great potential, and they realize that. Like Michael Jordan, there was so much. I think Jordan was the second pick, or he was the fourth pick. I don't remember what he was. And Michael Jordan, everyone thought Michael Jordan was going to be so great out of UNC, and he ends up being probably the greatest basketball player that any of us will have ever seen. And then you have guys like Zach Wilson, or who? Oh, you're going to say... Oh, well, that doesn't really go with what I'm talking about. But yeah, there is the Tom Brady. There are the Tom Bradys who had no expectations, and then they ended up. I'm talking purely about people who had high expectations right now, and some of them fulfilled those expectations and exceeded them, and some of them didn't. Have you ever met a person who had serious spiritual potential? They had a lot of spiritual potential. You had high expectations for them. And initially seemed super excited. And you're like, yeah, man, this person has real potential to do something for God. And then they blow it. They blow it. Maybe even for a short period of time accomplish great things for the Lord. And then they blow it. Those expectations that you might have had, or that we would have hoped this person could do great things for God, were never realized. In the southern kingdom of Judah, Queen Athaliah had tried to wipe out the house of David, and she nearly was able to completely accomplish it. And now Judah has a young boy as a king, a 7-year-old Joash, and he's being trained in the ways of the Lord. There's so much potential for this young king. Will the potential be realized, or will he blow it? let's look at his reign and figure it out. In the 7th year, we're in 2 Kings 12. In the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash, that's Joash. And by the way, if I say Josiah, I don't mean Josiah. For some reason, every time I want to say Joash, I keep saying Josiah. So if I say Josiah, maybe just like, remind me, or just say Joash. Okay, just say it. All right, Joash. In the 7th year of Jehu, Jehoash, who is Joash, became king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Zebiah of Beersheba. So he's 7 years old. It's the year 835. I think, here we go. All the way on the right side of the screen, all the way at the bottom. The year 835. This guy's going to rule for decades. He's going to rule for 40 years. He's going to rule for decades. Finally, during the life of Joash, the throne of Judah has been separated from the house of Ahab. And this is a good thing. Is he a good king? Is he a bad king? Well, verse 2 says, Jehoash did right in the sight of the Lord all his days in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. And so what we see here is that he did right. We see that here. He did what God said he should do, but he only did that in the days which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. So Jehoiada you might remember, the high priest protected Joash from the time he was a little child. He has major influence over Joash. And so as long as the high priest is alive, Joash, is like a father figure to him. Joash is a good king. But there's still a certain level of compromise in Joash's rule, which we see in verse 3. Only the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. So what you have here is, these are worship sites. They would, when you read about the high places, they felt that the higher you got up in elevation, the closer you were to the gods. And so they would build these worship sites on mountains, the high places. And they weren't, at times these high places were really super idolatrous high places where they worshiped false gods like Baal and like Asherah and maybe like Chemosh and Molech and some of these people you've read about in the Bible. But sometimes these high places, and a lot of times what we're reading in Kings, these high places aren't like idolatrous worship sites that are dedicated to false gods. They're worship sites that are dedicated to the Lord, but this is not where that was supposed to happen. Like sacrifices and offerings should not have happened anywhere besides Jerusalem. They should only have been offered at the temple. And so there's some reform that's going on here that we've already seen, but it's not a perfect reform. And as the years go by, the temple of the Lord is in disrepair. That is, things are getting run down. It's the temple. Can anyone tell me approximately, I don't need the exact year, approximately when the temple is being built? Can anyone remember when Solomon becomes king? Approximately. Anyone? Well, let's start with Saul. He rules from 1050 to 1010. Then you have, I don't have it up here. 1050 to 1010. Then David rules from 1010, 40 years to 970. And then Solomon rules from 970 to 930. So right at the beginning of Solomon's reign is when the temple's being built. Okay, so this temple, if we're talking the 960s or so, maybe a little earlier, a little later, depending on how you count the years, and it's now 835 or so, the temple of the Lord's over 100 years old, and it's in disrepair. It needs some serious repair work. Just look at this building, and in a matter of, you go a few years without keeping up on a building like this, and it could really be, most of you probably, the building's generally in repair. There's some little things here and there we need to take care of, but I would say about 12 years ago, there was some pretty serious disrepair I mean, we had just gotten a new roof, which was nice, but there was a lot of things. There were a lot of things that needed to be repaired. And we felt like after a few years, there was a backlog of repairs that we needed to get done. And even now, there's still a backlog. There's always going to be repairs. 100 years or so, 130 years, there's repairs that need to be done. And so Joash calls the priests to repair the temple in verses 4 and 5. So we're seeing some good things here from Joash. We're seeing him doing right in the sight of the Lord. We're seeing him wanting to, he doesn't take care of the high places, but he is wanting to repair the temple, a site that's dedicated to the worship of the Lord. The site, the holy site in Jerusalem, the world really. Then Jehoash said to the priests, all the money of the sacred things which is brought into the house of the Lord, and current money, both the money of each man's assessment and all the money which any man's heart prompts him to bring into the house of the Lord, let the priests take it for themselves, each from his acquaintance, and they shall repair the damages of the house wherever any damage may be found. So now Joash has assumed that role of a leader in Israel, and he tells the priests that they need to repair the house of the Lord, because the fact is, it's an embarrassment when the house of the Lord is in shambles. It's not a good thing, and when it comes to the temple, I mean, it's like an insult to the Lord. And so they have these various sources of income that get referred to at various times in the Scripture and even in this passage. One of those sources is the temple tax. You might remember Jesus paying the temple tax in the New Testament. Each person had to pay a half shekel tax. You could read about it in Exodus 30. There was personal vow money that's kind of discussed here in Leviticus 25. What you have is these voluntary offerings in the end of verse 4, the money which any man's heart prompts him to bring into the house of the Lord. And so the king wants these funds to go into repairing the temple. You don't repair the temple, there won't be a temple. So he wants to repair the temple, and he sends the priests throughout the cities of Judah to collect money from people to repair the temple. And we don't read about that necessarily here in this passage, but we do read about it in 2 Chronicles 24, which we're not going to go to. There's some more detail. In 2 Chronicles, you have a lot more detail about the temple, and it's kind of like a history of the kings of the south, of Judah. It's a history of those kings from a priestly perspective, whereas 1st and 2nd Kings is a history of the kings from more of a political type of a perspective. So just understand the difference between those two. You might see more detail in one book or the other, depending on what the scenario is. But anyway, the years go by. He sets this up in motion where he wants the temple to be repaired, and years go by, but the temple's still in disrepair. The temple is still run down. And so after decades of the status quo, the king has had enough. Look at verse 6. But it came about that in the 23rd year of King Jehoash, the priests had not repaired the damages of the house. And so it's been over 20 years since he's become king. He's like 30 years old now. And these priests haven't repaired the temple. Why? We're not 100% sure why. Maybe there's a tight budget. Maybe there's something dishonest. We just don't know. And so because this temple hasn't been repaired, Joash takes matters into his own hands, and he kind of supervises the scenario himself. Then King Jehoash called for Jehoiada the priest. This is like his father figure. This is the priest who basically saved his life when he was little, when he was a baby. Then King Jehoash, who raised him up during Athaliah's evil reign. Then King Jehoash called for Jehoiada the priest and for the other priests and said to them, "Why do you not repair the damages of the house? Now, therefore, take no more money from your acquaintances, but pay it for the damages of the house." So the priests agreed, verse 8. So the priests agreed that they would take no more money from the people, nor repair the damages of the house. So you kind of have this changing of how this money is being taken. That's kind of what's happening. You have a changing of how it's being collected. And there's a new method that's instituted for collecting the money. But Jehoiada the priest took a chest. So you see the boxes, the 4 white boxes on the back of the walls. I mean, apparently there was a time in this church and its history where I don't know, either they didn't take an offering. They didn't take offerings. And do you know approximately when that was?
It was before Pastor Ford. It was Ron Rice.
So we're probably talking 70s, early 80s. That would have been my guess. That would have been my guess. And they had the boxes on the wall. Actually, I think the boxes are fantastic. That's been my primary source when I just don't have something sent automatically. That was always my primary source for giving anyway. I'd walk in, I'd just kind of drop it in the box and come on in. But now everything is kind of streamlined so much, like I have an arrangement with the church where the church just kind of gets my funds automatically and that type of stuff, gets my offerings automatically. But anyway, they do something similar to what we have in the walls here. But Jehoiada the priest took a chest and bored a hole in its lid and put it beside the altar on the right side as one comes into the house of the Lord. So we're in the temple complex here. And the priests who guarded the threshold put in it all the money which was brought into the house of the Lord. So we have this collection box being made. We have a little more detail about that in 2 Chronicles 24, which you're not going to read. The king kind of calls for this to happen. Jehoiada kind of institutes it. They use the collection box in verse 10. When they saw that there was much money in the chest, the king's scribe and the high priest came up and tied it in bags and counted the money which was found in the house of the Lord. They were responsible. They were responsible. By the way, our church, we have a system set up that's designed for responsibility and accountability with the voluntary offerings of the church. So one of the reasons why you always see two guys, we never have anyone count alone. Is that correct? There's a minimum of 2 or 3. I don't know. It's a minimum of 2. So there's always 2 guys who are counting, and then it gets, if I remember it, pretty much always gets deposited with a minimum of 2 people. So I see someone in a car waiting for the other one, and the other one follows him over. And they, I mean, think about this. This is the level of, and it's the way we've always done it, and I don't see us changing it. But you put this, you have 2 guys go over to the bank and deposit the money into the bank. And so there's a system of accountability here. Some churches haven't always had that. There was a local church where, I mean, there's all types of local churches where the pastors really kind of run the finances and they run the budget and they deal with all the finances themselves. And it's just absolutely wild how there's a complete lack of accountability and misappropriation of funds and all types of stuff. We have a system here that it's a good system. And they had a system where they wanted it to be a responsible system and they counted, according to 2 Chronicles 24, they counted it on a daily basis. They'd count the offerings that were brought in. And then the money was given to the contractors in verses 11 and 12. They gave the money which was weighed out. And remember, you're dealing with a lot of coinage. Today, coins don't really, do we use, who carries pocket change around? Henry? Brittany, that's a surprise. The young people, I can't stand change. Tom, I didn't see your hand up. No, you ain't nobody got time for that, right? You spent years carrying pocket change around, didn't you? Aren't you kind of done with that? I'm so done with it. If I get change, if I have to pay, so let's say I'm like in New York and I happen to have cash and there's change involved, I'm going to use like my credit card or Apple Pay. I'm not walking around with change. I'm not interested, sorry. Because change doesn't really, quarters have some value, but like the penny, the penny should be abolished. It's like, especially after Biden took over, it is completely worthless, a penny. So if you ever want to insult somebody and you owe them money, you pay them in bags of pennies. It's a complete insult. It really is. But anyway, here you're dealing with coins that were pulled, and there was more value, and that was the primary way of exchanging funds. It was coins. So they're weighing this out. They're weighing the coins out. They gave the money which was weighed into the hands of those who did the work, who had the oversight of the house of the Lord. And they paid it out to the carpenters and the builders who worked on the house of the Lord, and to the masons and the stone cutters, and for buying timber and hewn stone to repair the damages of the house of the Lord, and for all that was laid out for the house to repair it. So you're seeing repair work being done, which is a good thing. And it was specifically put aside for repairs in verses 13. There's time that's spent in 2nd and in 2nd Chronicles to repairing the house of the Lord. It's a significant thing to do. About 10 years or so ago, 11 years or so, I remember standing up in front of this church and making a biblical argument why it was important to keep our building in good condition, because I think there was some thought in the minds of some people we shouldn't be putting money into repairing the building. It's like, no, this is important stuff. I mean, the Bible spends some time talking about this. Of course, the temple is way bigger than a local church, but there were not made for the house of the Lord silver cups, snuffers, bowls, trumpets, any vessels of gold or vessels of silver from the money which was brought into the house of the Lord, for they gave that to those who did the work, and with it they repaired the house of the Lord. So you have this repair work that was this money that was specifically laid aside for the repair work, and they didn't use the money for anything else until the temple was repaired. We see honest dealings by faithful men. Moreover, they did not require an accounting from the men into whose hand they gave the money to pay to those who did the work, for they dealt faithfully. So we had these carpenters who were doing the job faithfully. They weren't dishonest. I mean, these people are like, yeah, we're going to do the work. We're going to do the work of the house of the Lord. We're not going to rip off. I mean, could you imagine? Could you imagine ripping off? Can you imagine being a Jewish carpenter and ripping off the temple to get your work done? I just read about someone who went to, I don't want to name the place. In fact, I'm not even sure I have the right place. I think I know what it was, but I just saw how someone said they took their car to a local repair shop, and the guy tried to sell them for $5,000 of repairs on his car, and then he took it to his uncle's garage, and it needed $100 of stuff. It's just absolutely insane. Some of these people will absolutely. That's why I'm really careful about who I take my car to, because some of those people are just out there to steal your money. Could you imagine a guy like that ripping off the temple? No, these guys were honest men who did the work in an honest way. And while all this is happening, the priests are still being taken care of. They're still being supported. The money from all the guilt offerings and the money from the sin offerings was not brought into the house of the Lord. It was for the priests. And so you still have this system of supporting the priests. And so the entire project goes well once the king gets involved. And it's a little bit of a picture of how things should be. It's something that churches should consider in how they do their finances today. That is, there should be honesty in dealing with finances and repairs. And our church has been fantastic with that. Now listen, the fact is if we really wanted to, I could take advantage of the situation. I have a credit card. And there's a limit I don't know what the limit is on our credit card. It's probably high. We probably have something, I don't know. What do you think? You think it's like a $5,000? I'd have to think a $5,000 or $10,000 limit. I'd have to think that. I don't know. I don't even know. I try to never, I never want to use it because I never want to submit reports. I don't want to scan the receipts. Isn't that the worst part of it? Scanning the receipts or turning them in and filling out the pay. It's terrible. And I got to do it for Roxanne half the time. She's doing better now. She's doing her own more and more. But every month I've got to make sure that all the receipts are there, and I've got to send them over to Paul. And I don't want to use the credit card. I don't want to do it. And then every once in a while, because it's connected to my Amazon account, because we buy stuff through my personal account with the church credit card for the church. Every once in a while, it gets messed up, and I accidentally clicked the wrong credit card, or my wife accidentally clicked the wrong credit card, and it's a pain in the neck. Then we owe the church money, or they owe us money, and it's a pain. It's such a pain. It's a necessary evil. You know what I'm talking. Have you ever done that where it's like, I used the wrong credit card. Now I've got to write a check, or I've got to have it withheld, or something like that. We could, if we wanted to. We could misuse that situation. Like this one pastor I know of, fairly local, I'm a pretty local pastor, and I think I brought it up fairly recently, who used the church credit card to pay his kid's college bill with the intention that he was going to pay it back. And he didn't have the money to pay it back. In my mind, you're disqualifying yourself. Does anyone disagree with that statement? When you're misappropriating church funds, you are disqualifying yourself from being in a position of leadership in a church. Is that a fair statement? I think that's a fair statement. Well, they didn't see it that way, and the church split. So half of them thought he still should be a pastor, the other half didn't, and they split. But anyway, we have this picture of honest financial dealings. And everything seems so well under the rule of Joash, and he seems so far like such a great king, and he seems to really care about things of the Lord, and all is well. And then trouble comes. Trouble comes from an external source, the Syrians. Now, does anyone remember, you might remember a little bit about these Syrians. These are the guys up here in the north and the northeast. And you might remember a lot of fights going on between Israel and Syria under the reign of Ahab and his sons. They kept fighting over this little piece of land right here, Ramoth Gilead, right on the border of Israel and Syria. Well, Syria comes in. Now, Syria comes in and invades. We're dealing with the land of Judah now. Syria comes in and invades the land, and they come down the coastal plains, and they take the city of Gath, and they set their eyes on Jerusalem. Now check this out. If we do this as the bird flies, oh, wait a minute. No, I don't need info on Gath right now. I don't know if you could see that number, but it's 25 miles away as the bird flies. Can anyone see that number, or is that too small? Some of you can see that. 24, 25 miles away as the bird flies. Now, it's not exactly, you can't exactly do it as the bird flies, but let's call it under 30 miles away. So this Syrian army has come down the coastal plains, taken the city of Gath, and now they have their sights set on Jerusalem. Check this out in the passage, verse 17. Then Hazael, king of Aram, went up, and does anyone remember how Hazael became king? Anyone remember? Red rum. Murder. Right? Murder. Does anyone remember how he did it? Pretty much smothered them. We talked about kind of like waterboarding-ish type of a thing. Yes, basically, suffocated them. Hazael, king of Aram, Syria, went up and fought against Gath and captured it. And Hazael set his face to go up to Jerusalem. Now, this is where so my process works like this. When I'm working through a passage, I work through the passage. I break it down. I outline it. I do a diagram of where the main clauses are, and then I like to look at parallel passages. And so what I did was I went over to the parallel passage in 2 Chronicles, and then I lay out 2 Kings here and 2 Chronicles here, and I go line by line, and I pay attention to the differences between the two passages. And here, 2 Chronicles gives us some more stuff, expands upon what we read about here. Check this out, 2 Chronicles 24:15. Now when Jehoiada reached a ripe old age, he died. He was 130 years old at his death. This is the high priest. They buried him in the city of David among the kings because he had done well in Israel and to God and his house. But after the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and bowed down to the king, and the king listened to them. So now the king, instead of listening to Jehoiada and the spiritual leader, starts listening to these political leaders, right? These people who are connected to, perhaps to the royal family at some level. These advisors, they're not connected to the temple necessarily. Look at verse 18. They abandoned the house of the Lord. Now, what did we just read about? We just read about all this work that went into you might have been like, what's he talking about, all this work in the house? Well, this is boring. Let's move on to the next. You needed to hear that because you needed to see what happened. You need to see the contrast of what happened, how things changed. They abandoned the house of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and served the Asherah, and the idols. So wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for this their guilt. Yet God sent prophets to them to bring them back to the Lord. Though they testified against them, they would not listen. Josiah and the people would not listen. See, I told you I would do it. And some of the reason I'm doing it is because I'm actually writing through Josiah's life right now. So I'm writing through Josiah's, I'm in Joash's, and it's messing my head. My rods and my brain's getting all messed up, But anyway, verse 20. Then the Spirit of God came on Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, the priest. So who's Jehoiada? He was the priest or the high priest or whatever. And what's his relation to Joash? What's that? He basically raised him. I'd have to think through the whole relationship. Sisters, I think so. I think that's how it works, yeah. Then the Spirit of God came, because it was the sister saved him. So that would have been the aunt. So yeah, I guess that would be uncle. Then the Spirit of God came on Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada. So Zechariah is a son of the high priest who, if that high priest is also raising Josiah, Joash, then these guys are kind of like, almost could be something like brothers. Maybe they're not actual brothers, but you understand if you're kind of being brought up by the high priest, and the high priest also has a son, there's something there it's like a brother relationship. So the Spirit of God comes on Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, the priest, and he stood above the people and said to them, "Thus God has said, why do you transgress the commandments of the Lord and do not prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord, he has also forsaken you." So now he comes out with this prophecy. You guys have forsaken God, and now God's forsaken you. Judgment's coming. We don't read about this in 2 Kings, but it's an important part of the story in 2 Chronicles for a reason. So they conspired against him in verse 21, and at the command of the king, they stoned him. It was like killing your own brother. It's like, you're going to tell me, you're going to judge me. Don't you judge me. Something like that. You're going to judge me. You're going to embarrass me. You're going to call me out for worshiping idols. We're going to kill you. And I don't care that you're Jehoiada's son. This is a guy who's changed. Joash is a guy who's changed at this point, and not for the better. And look at what they did. They stoned him to death in the court of the house of the Lord, right in the temple courts. They kill him right there. It's like this is a place where sacrifices and offerings would be brought to the priests, and you're going through that area where those offerings will be brought, and you're committing murder right there, right in front of God's face, so to speak. Thus, Joash the king did not remember the kindness which his father Jehoiada had shown him, which Zechariah's father Jehoiada had shown him, but he murdered his son. And as he died, he said, "May the Lord see and avenge." Yeah. Joash changed. He lets the house of the Lord get back into disrepair. He begins worshiping idols. God sends a messenger to warn him. He kills that messenger, who's kind of like his brother. Things have changed. He apparently has let leadership get to his head, let power and authority get to his head. And so the Lord sends the Syrians against Judah as an agent of judgment. We don't read about that part in 2 Kings, but that's what happened. The Syrians came as judgment. Hazael, the king of Syria, comes against them. He controls the area on the other side of the river, over here in the Transjordan. He now controls the area in the coastal plains by the Mediterranean. He controls all the trade routes into and out of Egypt and into and out of Arabia. And now he wants control of Judah and Jerusalem, his biggest threat. And he's at the doorstep of Jerusalem, only 25 miles away as the bird flies. call it 30 miles. His army's 30 miles away. And Joash realizes how serious this threat is, and he apparently goes to fight against him, and at some level gets sick, perhaps from being wounded. It's a battle that he can't win, and so he takes all the money. He takes all the money that's in the house of the Lord. All this money that they're collecting to repair the place, and then all the money that continues, all the offerings, so these are what they are, the offerings, and he gives it to the king of Syria to bail himself out. That would be like me placing sports bets, getting way in the hole, and taking your offering money and paying off my sports bet. How would you take that? I mean, it's a little different, obviously, because this is a king, but he's taking the offerings, and he's using the offerings as tribute money. Look at verse 18. Jehoash, king of Judah, took all the sacred things that Jehoshaphat and Jehoram and Ahaziah, his fathers, kings of Judah, had dedicated, and his own sacred things, and all the gold that was found among the treasuries of the house of the Lord and of the king's house, and sent them to Hazael, king of Aram. Then he went away from Jerusalem. He pays them off. Pays them off with gold that he finds everywhere, including in the temple. The Syrians had invaded Jerusalem with a small number of men and succeeded, and you could read about that here back in the 2 Chronicles 24 passage. Now it happened at the turn of the year that the army of the Arameans came up against him, and they came to Judah and Jerusalem, destroyed all the officials of the people from among the people, and sent all their spoil to the king of Damascus. Indeed, the army of the Arameans came with a small number of men, yet the Lord delivered a very great army into their hands, because they had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. Thus they executed judgment on Joash. And Joash gives the temple money to pay him off and get him off, to get him out of his hair. He's bribing the foreign king with that money. And that money will be used for who knows what. Talk about a misappropriation of funds. It's one of the reasons why we're so careful with the Deacons Fund money. In general, we're extremely careful with the Deacons Fund money. And one of our policies is if you use drugs, or if you smoke, or if you drink, you don't qualify for Deacons Fund money, because the Lord's offerings are not paying for cigarettes, tastes like cigarettes, or for drugs or for alcohol. Who knows what God's money's being used for in Syria here. And that is basically the life of King Joash, in summary. Now, the rest of the acts of Joash and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? He's 47 years old. When he's my age, I'm going to be 47 in a couple of months. His own servants conspired against him and killed him. His servants arose and made a conspiracy and struck down Joash at the house of Millo as he was going down to Silla. For Jozachar, the son of Shimeath, and Jehozabad, the son of Shomer, great names for a baby, by the way. Jehozabad, the son of Shomer, his servants, struck him, and he died. And they buried him with his fathers in the city of David, and Amaziah, his son, became king in his place. The names of the conspirators don't really matter. The names of the places don't really matter. They kill him at the house of Millo, which doesn't really matter where that is. But the Millo is basically a tiered stair-step structure that was kind of like foundational support for the city of David. And they did it. Check this out. In back to the 2 Chronicles. When they had departed from him, the Syrians, for they left him very sick, which is why I suspect that maybe that could have happened in the fighting. He might have gotten injured, might have. His own servants conspired against him because of the blood of the son of Jehoiada the priest. May God see and avenge. And God saw. And God did. God did see and God did avenge. Because of the blood of the son of Jehoiada the priest, and murdered him in his sleep. And they buried him in the city of David, but they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. He came to power as a result of a coup, and he died as a result of a coup at some level. Joash's life is a sad, sad story of unrealized expectations. He's not Peyton Manning. He's not Dan Marino. He's Zach Wilson. He's Gary Sanchez, macarons. He's Kevin Moss. He was supposed to be great. He was supposed to bring the people of Judah closer to the Lord. In the end, he was an idolater. And he only worshiped the Lord as long as Jehoiada was alive. And he died as an idolater and a murderer. And he was a major, major disappointment. He was a person who served the Lord temporarily. Even the good things that he did were pretty much reversed. He fixed the temple, and then he let it go into disrepair. He gathered money for the temple, and then he gave it away to a foreign king as tribute. He followed the Lord, and then he served idols. This is a guy whose life is like two different stories. What a waste. What a waste of potential. Such high expectations for this young king, and initially it looked like he was going to fulfill those expectations, but then in the end he failed to attain to the godly expectations that Judah had for him. He turned away from the Lord, and he was ultimately killed. I would say this from this account. Now look, we know there's no perfect king. We know that all these kings have their downfalls, and we know that what Israel really needs is a messianic king. We know that what we all really need is the Messiah. One day he's going to come back and rule. And if you place your faith in him and you trust in his completed work on the cross, you'll have everlasting life. We know as we go through Kings, and we know that in the end, there's a whole vision for a messianic king that's needed. The ultimate Davidic king. All these guys fall short. We know that. That's something we can see and read in every king, every paragraph. Maybe I haven't brought that up enough, but that's clear. But when I look at King Joash's life, I say, don't you follow the pattern of Joash. Don't you follow the Lord only as long as you're in your parents' house. Because that happens sometimes with kids, doesn't it? They'll follow the Lord only for so long, but then as soon as they're out from under their parents' thumb, they'll go and worship idols. Maybe not idols, but they'll go and live like lost people. Don't worship the Lord only to turn away from him later like King Joash. You remain committed to the Lord throughout your entire life, knowing that he is the ultimate king that one day comes back and that you'll have to answer to. Don't fall away into a life of sin or worldliness. Don't be a person like Joash. Don't live a life of unrealized expectations of godliness. We're going to take our hymnals and turn to 251. And if you're not sure you're saved, then you be sure you come and see me, and we'll get you lined up with someone who could explain the gospel to you more clearly. If you look at your life and you say, you know what, yeah, I started out really good, I started out really great, I started out really passionate about the Lord, and maybe I haven't come full turn like Joash. Maybe I haven't had a 180, but man, maybe I have started. Maybe I've started to drift. And if I keep on this path, I'm going to end up away from God. If that's you, then while we sing this hymn, you get things settled with God. You repent now. Stand and sing 251.